There's a place He comes to me. Though I'm blind, He helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see Him face to face.
This is Kurt Kaikkonen, pastor of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, at your neighborhood church. Today on Face to Face, we'll be in the book of Matthew. So grab your Bibles and let's get started. If you want to hear this complete message in its entirety, go to yourneighborhoodchurch.com, where you can download Your Neighborhood Church app at the App Store. And so now we're told that the leaders in the kingdom of heaven, they don't look to be served, but to serve. And Jesus says that if you want to be the greatest, you need to be a servant. And that word for servant in Greek is a diakonos, which means deacon. That's where we get our word deacon from. But then if you want to be first, if you actually want to be the very greatest in the kingdom of heaven, that you need to be a slave. And the Greek word here for slave is doulos. And that's the kind of slave where you actually belong to another. You don't even own your own life. And here it says that you're going to have to serve everyone at your master's will. And you have to remember that humility and servanthood, it was despised in the Roman world. Their world ran on pride and dominance, and not by being a servant, but by having servants and having slaves, able to do your bidding and to dominate. And so you would conquer others because that's what they considered to be power. But the kingdom of heaven, they have servant leaders where humility and servanthood is a characteristic of their rulers. So it's a life of giving, not getting, because that's what's displayed to us by God, and that's displayed to us also by Jesus Christ Himself. And God, who is above all, who is the creator, He has always served His creation with everything that we need for life. And Jesus, and He came to serve, and He gave everything He had. He served us with even His own life. And so if we're going to be like them, because we're their people, well, then that means that we have to have their nature and to serve others. And it's not because we have to, it's because we want to, that we want to be like them. Now, the devil, he has slaves, and he'll get his slaves by trying to bring you into bondage and to make you his slave. And he'll do it by dominating you and by forcing you to serve him. But God, He never makes anyone a slave. He never makes anyone serve Him. He never forces anyone to give anything to Him. Everything that He receives, it has to be given out of your own free will. He only receives things from willing hearts, from those who give their lives out of love for Him, because they recognize who He is, and so they offer their own lives in faith. Now, in the church, we are also still supposed to have servant leaders, where some churches will go around and they'll call their leaders reverend. At Calvary Chapel, we don't do that. We're just called pastors. And a pastor is just a Latin word for a shepherd, because we're here to serve God's sheep, and we're actually one of His sheep. So we're not to be revered, where the word reverend comes from, higher than anybody else. We're just servants. We're just like everybody else. We're just following in Jesus' example. And now here it says, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give His life a ransom for many. Well, the common usage for that word, ransom, was for the payment of a slave to be set free. But we always see this term being used on TV or in the movies for somebody who's been kidnapped, where a ransom has to be paid to those who had stolen them, the kidnappers. And that also applies because our lives, they've been stolen from God by Satan. And Jesus's life was that price to be paid to meet the price of the ransom to have us returned back to God. And unless this ransom is paid for each of us, no one will ever escape. And there is no other price for a ransom. And so that means there's actually no other hope except in Jesus. All right, so Jesus is now leaving Jericho, and he's on the road to Jerusalem, and there's a lot of people following him. And it's not just because of Jesus being there, it's because it's getting close to the Passover. And so there would be pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem for the Passover feast because it's required. And so on this busy roadside, this would be the perfect place for these two blind men to beg. And so it's around the feast time, and so people, they would also be more generous. And this account is also written in Mark's gospel. But in Mark, he only mentions Bartimaeus. Mark doesn't tell us anything about this other blind companion. And the reason that some think Mark only mentions Bartimaeus is because the first readers of Mark's gospel, they would have known who Bartimaeus was, because Bartimaeus, he would have still been alive at that time, and he would have been a member of the early church. So he's just mentioning him by name because they would have all known him. And so with these two men, now they're living around Jericho, they would have had very little hope of ever being able to go out and to find Jesus. But they would have heard about all the things Jesus had been doing and how he had healed blind men before. And so now here he is, and he's coming down their street. And so they start shouting out to him, and they're shouting for mercy. Son of David, have mercy on us. And although they're physically blind, their spiritual eyes are open, because they call Jesus by his messianic title, Son of David. Because again, the term Son of David, the only thing it meant was the Messiah. And so this crowd here that they call a multitude is telling these men to shut up. But there is no way these men are going to shut up, no matter what anybody said, because this was their opportunity. This was a dream come true. And little did they know that this would be the only opportunity they would ever have, because Jesus, he was never going to pass this way again, because Jesus was going to be crucified in about a week. And so then Jesus, he calls them over to himself, and he knows they're blind. And then Jesus asks them, what do you want me to do for you? Because they need to ask. They need to say it, so that when that miracle happens to them, they can't explain it in any other way. And that's what we need to do also. When we want something to change and we want something from Jesus, even though he knows exactly what we need, we still need to ask, so that when he answers, we give him all the credit, we give him all the glory, and we acknowledge that we didn't get better on our own, but we acknowledge his goodness. And so now Jesus, he touches their eyes, and immediately they receive sight. And instead of running home to go tell their moms, they follow him. You kind of wonder, did they follow him all the way to Jerusalem? Did they follow him all the whole week? Did they follow him all the way to the cross? But the thing to learn here from these two beggars is that if the Lord, if he brings you into any kind of circumstances of something he wants to do in your life, you don't let anybody talk you out of it. Because if these men would have kept their mouths shut and they would have listened to the crowd, or if they would have caved into all the peer pressure, they wouldn't have been healed, and they would have never had this opportunity again. They would never have what God wanted to do for them in their lives. And so you never let anybody talk you out of what the Lord wants to do in your life. So if God has placed something in your heart and you know it's God, you do it. And Jesus, he knew that they would be on that road. You never know. That may be the whole reason Jesus even took that road. So now we're told that Jesus is getting close to Jerusalem, and he's on the Mount of Olives. And the Mount of Olives is this sloped hillside on the east side of Jerusalem. And this village, Bethphage, it's a small village that's actually built into the slopes of the hillside. Jesus, he knows that he will be crucified in 5 days on the Passover. And he's not sneaking in secretly into Jerusalem, but he's entering this time in the very most public way possible. He's no longer hiding the fact that he is the Messiah, the King of the Jews, because now his day has come. Up until now, Jesus has been saying, my time has not come, it's not my time, but now his time has come. And this day was actually prophesied to the very exact date when the Messiah would enter into Jerusalem to reveal himself to Israel. And that prophecy came about 500 years before this day. It's all the way back to the book of Daniel, when the prophet Daniel wrote about it. You can find that in Daniel chapter 9, 20. And when you get to verse 25, it says that the angel Gabriel tells Daniel, it says, "Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah, the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks." All right. But we also know the date of that command, because that date is given to us in the book of Ezra. And so that date had actually been written down. And that actual date is March 14th, 445 BC. That was the day that King Cyrus, the king of Persia, gave the command to restore the temple. So if you add all these weeks up and you convert it to days, that'll bring you to April 6, 32 AD. And that is this exact date where Jesus, he rode into Jerusalem on the donkey's colt right here. And he presents himself as the Messiah. And so this is a day of fulfilling prophecy. And we read one here that's quoted. And he knows that he's going to be fulfilling this prophecy in Zechariah 9:9, that he's going to be riding into Jerusalem on a donkey's colt. And so what he does is he sends 2 of his disciples to the village to go loose the colt. And Jesus, he already knows that they're going to send it because it's already been prearranged. It's been prearranged by God. And so they bring this donkey and then his colt, and they make this makeshift saddle out of their clothes. You have to realize, Jesus, he wasn't riding that donkey because he was tired. They have walked all the way from Galilee. And now this is the last 2 miles. And this last 2 miles is all downhill. The only reason Jesus rode this colt was to show that he was humble and that he was coming in peace as a king. Because donkeys used to be the ride of royalty at peacetime before King Solomon started bringing in all the horses. Now, Rome, if Rome was looking at this and they saw Jesus, they wouldn't really think of him much of a conquering king coming on a little donkey's colt, and they would have laughed at him. This would have been a joke. They wouldn't be threatened. Not Caesar, not Pilate. And of all these people around him, there probably wouldn't have even been one sword among them. But this crowd on this hillside going into Jerusalem, it would have been absolutely huge. Now, the city of Jerusalem, it had a population yearly of usually about 100,000 people. But at the Passover, the population swelled to about 2 million people. And so you already have all these people that were following Jesus all the way down from Galilee, right? And then you also have the pilgrims who are bringing their sacrifices to the Passover. And that was required by law. That's why the city swelled so high. They would have been bringing their lambs. So there'd be all these sheep and all those lambs, that were going to be sacrificed for the Passover. They would have had to have been with them for 3 days because that was required that the lamb would have to live with them for at least 3 days prior to being offered.
You've been listening to Face to Face. Face to Face on this radio station has been provided by Your Neighborhood Church. If you want to help support Face to Face and put this program on other stations just like yours, you can contact us at yourneighborhoodchurch.com or write Your Neighborhood Church, P.O. Box 500, Romeo, Michigan 48065.
There's a place he comes to me. Though I'm blind, he helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see him face to face.
Tune in again tomorrow at this same time as we continue to go through the Bible.